So today we're going to do three things, two and a half things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to review the story characters for 5/7s that we did in class, because that will help you remember what the different parts and pieces of the 5/7 does to resolve. Then second thing we're going to do is we're going to translate that into textbook speak so that you know what that looks like in the textbook, and that will end up being a little bit of homework there. Okay. And then the other thing is I'm just going to preview, this is number 3, I'm going to preview writing non-chord tones. Okay. And what we're going to do with that is you have a worksheet that we gave out in class where we did the top part of it, you know, but what am I identifying it? And then it says, let's do this here. And I will do this with you. And so your job is just to follow along. Okay. So, but first, let's go with reviewing the story of the 5/7. So we simplified or complicated, depending on how you feel about it. We personified, I'll put myself in the key of C, the 5/7 chord into its different parts. And we're going to resolve to one chords. Okay. So here I'm going to go G, B, D, and F. Okay. That's my 5/7 chord right there. G, B, D is the triad. There's that. The root in the bass, root in bass was the king, right? The third of the chord, which is T, is the princess. The fifth of the chord, right, which is Re, right? This is Sol, by the way, is the queen. And the seventh of the chord, which is Fa, is the prince. And they have jobs that they do in their archetypal stories. So here's the job of the king. He goes root to root. In other words, he goes to the other king, who's the root of this chord in the bass, right there. Diplomatic meeting, whether they're friends, enemies, or otherwise, okay? And then the queen, the fifth, always does sort of genuflex or bows down and does what the king does to support. And we're not going to get into whether that's subjugation or she's simply playing her part in a complicated game of politics or not, but she also does the same. Think of her like kneeling down and being all proper and stately. Okay, then here we have the prince and the princess, and in our analysis, we're always going to block these two off to make sure that we deal with them correctly. Their job is to marry other people for the king to solidify ties. The prince always will, seventh, will always step down, okay? And that signifies like marrying, okay? And the princess, she's supposed to also get married, which is the step. And in this case, step up. Now, you'll know from a theory point of view that this is T or 7, and T likes to go to Do. Okay, and that's what we do. King goes to king, or root to root. Queen steps down. Prince steps down, and princess steps up. Okay, that's it right there. And if you remember these different parts, then you can think of the other variations on this as variations on the story. Okay. We call this where the prince steps down and the princess steps up. In other words, they marry or go where they have a tendency to. We call that strict resolution of the tritone. This is a tritone, 3 half steps or 3 whole steps right there. Okay. And that's very important. Much of what we do with the 5 chord depends on how this resolves. The prince is always going to step down, but if we're being strict with the princess, she has to marry who she's supposed to marry. Okay. Now there is another possibility here, and we'll do this again. Set it up in the same way: king, princess, right? The third, queen, and prince. Okay. 5/7. going to 1. In this other version of the story, everything happens the same, right? The queen steps down, the king goes to the king, the prince marries who he's supposed to, but the princess says, I don't want to marry the duke. He's nasty and he's like twice my age. I want to marry the pig farmer's son. And what she does is when no one's looking, instead of stepping up and marrying and doing strictly what she's supposed to do, instead she jumps out of her window and jumps down and runs away with the pig farmer's son. And she says, hooray, I am free, okay? When you have your 3rd and your 7th, the princess and the prince always does this. But when the princess jumps down instead of steps up, this is called free resolution of the tritone, which is these 2 notes right there. Okay, whether you do strict or free is partly dependent on what kind of sound you want and what kind of chord you want to set up at the end. Let me show you the difference between these 2. If you do strict resolution here, you end up with a root, a root, a root, and a 3rd. So you start with a complete chord here, right? And you end up with an incomplete chord right there. But that's okay, it's a good sound, right? Nice and stable, okay? However, if the princess says, no, I'm not going to, and skips down and is free from her obligations, then you end up getting a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a root. In other words, you get a complete chord here with doubled root, whereas you had 3 roots and a 3rd. So if we started with a complete 5/7 here, and you do free resolution, you get a complete chord right there. And that's something your textbook's gonna denote or demark for you. And that sounds really good too. Maybe a little bit richer because it has that 5th in there as well, okay? Now, there is another possibility, and it's called the incomplete 5/7 chord. I'm sorry for my left-handedness. You can't see until afterwards because the camera angle. All right, and what happens is in this particular situation or scenario, here's what's happened. Let's see, I'm gonna rearrange these now. So you're gonna have to look for the parts and pieces in a different way. This will be good because you should be able to figure these things out too. Okay. So let's take a look at this 5/7 chord here. There's my root. There's my 7th, right? I'm gonna put root and my 7th. And instead of a 5th, see no 5th? There's another root and there's my 3rd right there. Okay. In this scenario, the queen has died. She's not there. And instead we have a new character. It's another root, but it's not the king, it's a different root. It's the one that's not in the bass, okay? Or at least it's not the one, yeah, it's not the bass. And this other root that's not the in bass or not the king, right, is the king's evil brother, okay? Think like King Richard, think like evil Prince John, right? And in this case, here's what happens. Root goes to root, right? Like that. Good, right? This prince is still the prince and he's going to step down, right? And marry like he's supposed to. And in this case, even though the evil king's evil brother is like trying to tempt the princess, like, hey, why don't you go run away with the pig farmer? You deserve to be free and stuff like that. He's tempting, he's sowing discord in the kingdom. She says, no, I'm going to honor the memory of my mother, the queen. She always did what was important for the kingdom's stability rather than for herself. And I'm going to emulate that. Plus, dad is more depressed than I've ever seen him. I'm gonna do my job here, right? And you know, the prince has shown up. The king's brother has shown up because he's saying, well, it's so sad with the king's distraught. I'll come in and help. And so she does not do free resolution in an incomplete chord. She never does that. She only does the strict resolution when the queen is dead. And the evil king's brother who's supposed to be helping out, what does he do? Nothing. Yeah, I'm there to help, but mostly I'm there just for the free food. Okay. Now, in this case, you have an incomplete chord and you do strict resolution because that's just the only thing you're allowed to do with this. And you end up with this king's brother holding out and doing nothing. And you end up with complete chord, C, C, E, G, again, double root. So incomplete and complete, right? Your book will ask you to do homework in that way. There's one other caveat that you should know about this free resolution where the princess can go up, strict, or down. If the princess, the third of the chord, is in the top voice, okay? So in this case, she is in the top voice, although she chooses to get married. But in these situations, if we put the soprano note as the third of the chord, the princess, it's like locking her in the highest tower and keeping her under guard until the wedding comes and then marching her out and forcing her to get married strictly. So you cannot do free resolution if the third of the chord there is the top voice. It has to go to do. T likes to go to do when it's in the upper voice, which was remind you of when we were doing 5 to 6 resolutions. Remember, it's like, but T goes to do, especially if it's in the upper voice. Okay, there we go. Your textbook is going to ask you to do some resolutions like this. And this is your homework. It's on page 208. Okay, and this will be something you want to do and then bring to school on Monday. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to do 208, these ones, it says 1 through 15, but only the ones that are 4-part. Okay, so not that one, not that one. Yes, this one, yes, this one, yes, this one. Yes, no, no, yes, yes. And then don't do the ones that are 5 to 6. We'll deal with them later. Okay, so I guess I'd like you to do just these first 2 lines here, and you're going to do 3, 4, 5, 6. No, sorry, that's going to 6 chord. Okay, so 6, 7 of these. Okay, we'll deal with these other ones here. Okay, anywhere it's 5 to 1 on the first 2 lines and 4 parts. Now, I just want you to see how this looks here, though. It says 5 complete to 1 incomplete, or I for incomplete. So you have to think backwards now and say, which method is it? Which one, if we start with a complete chord, gives us incomplete? And that's this one where you went strict resolution, right? So what they're asking you to do here is to do strict resolution of the tritone. That means T will go up, Fa will go down, and everybody else does their job. So here you go root to root. There's my 5th of the queen stepping down. Here's my princess. She's going to step up because it's going to be strict, giving us incomplete, and he's going to go down. So you're applying it to these, and the answers, of course, are in the back of the book as well if you need some help. But, you know, these ones here, again, we're going to do 3. We're going to do 4, 5, and looks like 6 and 7. And you have to say, well, which one? So only the 4-part ones, only the ones going to the 1 chord. And you have to say, well, which method am I using by virtue of that? Okay, so that will be homework. All right, last thing. This one right here, it's you're going back to your table in your textbook and you're saying, well, if I had to take this music right here and apply non-chord tones to it, how would I do that? And we're just going to do this part together. It's not homework that you have to turn in, but you should do this with me. So here's the, and then it looks like we're going to there. And then 1, I have to look over away from the keyboard to read this because it's on the camera. Sorry about that. And then finally to our half cadence right there. All right. So it says, add one of each of the following things: a passing tone, a suspension, an escape tone, an anticipation, and an appoggiatura. To do this, you have to know their definitions. Passing tone is entered by step and left by step in the same direction. a suspension is entered by holding a note over and then stepping down into the chord tone to resolve the dissonance. An escape tone, you enter by step and you skip away. An anticipation, and then the appoggiatura. Anticipation you can enter by any way, but usually it's by and then you anticipate the next chord tone by arriving there sooner. And then finally the appoggiatura, you're going to skip into it and step out of it. I'm gonna just show you where that table is again. It's in non-chord tones, chapter 11, and it's that first summary table right there. So if you need to, you can do that. Look at those. But I'm just going to go through this now. And you could do them differently in other places, but I want to bring up a couple issues while we do this. One is that when you put in these non-chord tones here, you got to still make sure that you don't do funny doublings. For instance, if I were right here, this is a 5/7 chord, and I know that I should not be doubling the seventh of a chord. That would be the A. And I don't want to double T, which is the seventh scale degree, which is right there. So neither of these notes do I want to duplicate here, because then I'm doubling a tendency tone. Okay. For instance, I wouldn't want to take this and then step down into the A right there and make some kind of like, I don't know, escape tone or something like that. It's not going to work because it's a chord tone, but you get the idea, right? Similarly, I don't want to be doubling the fifth here. I also don't want to make a situation where by adding this note, all of a sudden I've made parallel octaves or parallel fifths or hidden direct octaves or fifths and things. These are mistakes that can come up, right? So, we have to be careful of that. Anyhow, let's start. Passing tone. Passing tone is a place that connects two notes a third apart by steps in and steps out. So here I've got two notes that are a third apart. Those would be great places for passing tones, right? Here I have two notes that are a third apart. This would be another great place probably for a passing tone, right? Same thing right there. Any of these things will work really well. I'm just going to put it in the obvious place right here between. I'll turn that into a quarter note, but I could have done it there as well. In fact, I think I will, just so you can see. There's my passing tone, because this makes canon. Oops, should be an A, sorry. Right between them. So your soprano line is going to go, or, and then the bass line is going to, follow that. But they're both passing tones. They enter by step, right? And then the next one is, so you can hear that. So that's kind of nice. Put two passing tones in. A suspension is where you hold a note over. So the entrance is the same note and then it steps down. So we're looking for a place where the notes are going to step down, right? Like for instance, here, this note could be held over and then resolved down, and that would be a suspension. Same thing here and same thing there. These are all great places for suspensions. This is another place where you could have a suspension by holding that over and then delaying the D sharp till there. One thing about combining all these non-chord tones is that they can sound fine on their own, but they can clash with other ones. And since I have passing tone right here like this, I think I'm going to hold my suspension over here and just get it out of the way, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this note into a suspension by holding it over, entering the non-chord tone, because it won't be part of the chord here, by the same note, and resolving it down to that note coming up. So I'm going to cross that out. I'm going to add this. I'm going to put a tie on, not because you have to have a tie, but just because it visually shows that. See what I did there? I extended this note in, it became a non-chord tone here, resolved down by step, suspension. Now there's more to it than that. In class, we'll talk about other ways we have to label this because they're interested in the intervals and stuff. But for right now, don't worry about it. We'll just, that's it, okay? Another place, so escape tones. Escape tones can happen anywhere where you have a skip or a jump, because you're going to step and then you're going to skip away probably. So for instance, I could put like a step into the non-chord tone, that's my escape tone, and then jump down to there, right? I could step down to here in the soprano and then skip up into there, right? Just depends on what you want to do here. Okay. Now, in truth, there is an actual problem right here. I don't know if you can see that this is a B and an E. This is going to skip up into a, oh no, it's okay. Sorry, I thought it was going to be E and D, but it's different clef. But if this was in a direct octave or something, we would have to think about using a non-chord tone to get us out of that. I think we're okay though. I think we're going to be fine. So I think, let's see. I think we'll put it right. Maybe right here, we'll activate this line all the way up. We go up another step and then skip down, right? We step into it and we skip down. So I'll do that. Right. Now this is going to be a point of dissonance that will then resolve down. So far we have. And then there's my resolution of my, right, so, and then to my 2 chord. Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, so passing tone, suspension, right? Escape tone. We have an anticipation and an appoggiatura. Anticipations can happen anywhere, but they're most famous for the ends of pieces. And so I think I'm just going to do it right here, right there. And I'm going to even make this be delayed there. So you're going to hear this and you go like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. I'm just going to play right here for you. You'd hear something like this where you go like, aha. And then, right? So I'll play from the beginning of the measure. There's my suspension, and then my 2 diminished chord, and the anticipation of the last note. Again, it's entered by anything. Could have skipped into it. In this case, I stepped into it, and it's resolved by holding it out while the chord changes. Sort of the antithesis of a suspension. Suspension is the note holds out, and then finally the chord changes, and then it moves in. And this one is it's moved into, and then finally the chord changes and agrees with it. So it's a suspension and backwards. Appoggiatura is when you skip and then step. And there's a little care that needs to be taken here in that when appoggiaturas make big skips, they usually step in the opposite direction because we like to balance things out. Here's my favorite place to do this, I think right here. This is giant leap. I'll put a dotted there. It'll bring it out even more, right? So I'm like, right? And then dun, dun. That's pretty good. Escape tone, suspension resolution, and then anticipation. Right. So you can just see that a very plain texture started to become activated with non-chord tones, becomes very interesting and beautiful in its own way. There's care that has to be done so that you don't stack too many non-chord tones on top of each other without considering how that looks and sounds. And you have to always consider how it sounds, because that's, in the end, it doesn't matter how theoretically interesting it is, it's got to sound right for us. And then we have to just be careful that introductions of these extra notes don't cause us to make new, like hidden or direct octaves, fifths, those kind of things, parallel octaves and things. Okay, that's just an introduction to this. We'll cover some more on Monday. There are 2 quizzes in Canvas right now. If you're watching this in spring 21, right? It could be different. One goes over all this stuff here and says, do you understand the story elements? And the other one says, do you understand what all this means in terms of textbook speak about what strict and free resolution is, whether you get a complete, incomplete, complete, complete, or an incomplete, complete chord, those kind of things. 2 quizzes to practice that kind of stuff. And then for homework on Monday, bring your textbook and have those numbers things done. I'll put it up in an assignment as well. Don't forget also that you're trying to do chord analysis for the rest of the page here on Amazing Grace for Monday as well. All right, see you then.